Every year, there are dozens of domestic and family violence homicides in Australia involving children and their parents. Earlier this month, an anaesthetist killed her 8-year-old daughter in a murder-suicide in Brisbane. In May, a 3-year-old girl was stabbed to death by her mother at their home north of Bundaberg, while a 20-year-old was charged with murdering his 10-week-old baby girl in central Queensland in January. They're among the 5 known alleged filicide cases this year. Meanwhile, there's also been other murders where the kids have been the offenders. In 2 separate incidents in Victoria this year, teenagers were arrested for allegedly stabbing their mothers to death. And just last month, a 31-year-old man was arrested for the murders of his parents, who were found dead inside a takeaway shop in Sydney's West. The cases are always horrific and equally devastating, yet despite there being dozens in Australia each year, we know little about this type of offending and what drives it, an issue some experts say needs to change. One of them is former police detective inspector turned Bondi Uni criminologist, Dr Terry Goldsworthy. Terry, welcome back to the briefing. Can you start by explaining a bit about what filicide is and what insights we do have into this kind of offence in Australia?
Yeah, so filicide is one of the 4 domestic homicide types that we look at in Australia. So the 4 types are intimate partner violence, wife kills husband, husband kills wife, that type of stuff. Then we have filicide, which is killing of your children by the parent. We have siblicide, which is the killing of brother and sisters. And then we have parricide, which is the killing of your parents. So they are the 4 types that go towards making up domestic violence homicides in Australia. As we know, intimate partner violence, I think somewhere roughly around 75% of the offenders are male, 25% female, and the same for victims roughly. Filicide is a different nature because the offending is essentially on a par between male and females. So since 2001, some data that I obtained from the National Homicide Monitoring Project shows that, 52% of offenders were male and 48% were female. So it's a different type of offence in terms of it's gender neutral. We hear a lot of talk about gender-based violence, etc. This is probably an exception to that rule. The other thing, I guess, about filicide is it doesn't often get the exposure that we see from intimate partner homicides, and that's probably simply due to the fact the numbers are much smaller. But nonetheless, I think it's an important area to look at, and hence the reason we're here today talking about it, because these victims are especially vulnerable and they don't have a voice as such. They're young children when they're killed by their parents, and I think many of us struggle to understand why a parent or how a parent could actually kill their own child.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd said that recent cases in Australia, there'd been a few cases of mothers allegedly killing their children, and that you felt that that had exposed some kind of uncomfortable truth when it came to domestic violence. Can you tell me what you meant by that?
We're more prepared to accept violence from males, and that's based on what we've seen in intimate partner violence and things like that. Most assaults committed by men. I think when we see women, mothers killing their children, it's very hard for us to deal with. We have that kind of, ideology where, maternalistic mother won't do that kind of action to their child. But the facts tell us that, the data says that women will do it just as regularly as men. And I think that is a truth that is uncomfortable in terms of people, don't want to think that mothers would be capable of that same kind of horrendous action. And, they do kill in different ways. I guess you could say the gentler touch of killing. Women may not be as violent in the way they kill, but they're still killing. It may be through smothering or, suffocation, choking, rather than, stabbing or beating to death or something like that. So there is some variance in how it's done, but nonetheless, the outcome is the same. There's some soft reporting around it at times, often described as tragic, and, there's an immediate kind of rush to provide an explanation as to why this happened, that you don't necessarily see when a man or a father goes and kills their child. And, if you look through the media anecdotally, there was a couple of cases in Victoria which were quite interesting. They were almost identical in terms of the method of killing. So you had a father drive his 3 kids into a dam and they drowned and died, and he's subsequently been tried a number of times for murder. You then had a lady drive her car into a park lake and 3 children died. And the reporting around that was very varied in the way that it was approached. It was the same event, the same outcome in absolute terms. But there was this, soft reporting around the incident of female filicide versus the male filicide. And, that to me, I go, well, why are we doing that? These victims deserve to be treated equitably. It doesn't matter what gender's killing the kids are being killed. I think we should be careful of attempting to minimise or explain away, one form of filicide versus another. I mean, if there's a reasonable explanation in terms of a legal defence, that being insanity, which is a full defence to murder in Queensland, then by all means, let's put that out there and the legal process will be taking place. But, just because someone's depressed doesn't mean they're insane. It doesn't mean they're not criminally responsible.
I know what you're talking about. I did see a couple of cases only in recent weeks where that kind of language was used, just here in Queensland. Now, separately, you mentioned parricide a little bit earlier. There was some research that came out just in the last week talking about parricide and the act of a child killing their parent. What can you tell us about that kind of crime?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. It's come out from the OIC off the same program I just talked about before. About 5% of homicides are parricide, so small numbers. But what they tell us is that it's committed overwhelmingly by male offenders, and generally it's gendered in terms of the males will kill their fathers and females will kill their mothers. Knives seemingly the weapon of choice for parricide, as it is in, general homicides as well. So, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, small numbers. We do see the occasional offence where a parent is killed. I can remember my time in the police down here in charge of the criminal investigation branch in the Gold Coast. We did have 2 cases that actually, I think back about it now, we had a son who stabbed his father to death. He'd been using marijuana heavily for some time and killed him. And then we had a son who killed his mother, and we never found her remains, but he was charged and subsequently convicted of murder. And his motivation was he changed the will to get the unit, etc. recently. He then spent several weeks before he reported a missing, and we had a good circumstantial case, and he's still in jail today. And
earlier in an article that you'd written when you were talking about filicide, you described some of the victims as forgotten victims in the way that perhaps we don't report on them in the same magnitude because, like you said, perhaps they're smaller numbers. What do you think needs to change when having these discussions about these types of domestic and family violence crimes, whether it be filicide or parricide?
Well, I think we need to, I remember I was asked a question on a radio program once about domestic violence homicides, and I gave a breakdown of gender in terms of the offenders. And after I got off the air, I was contacted by a victim support service director. And she said to me, "Where did you get those figures from?" And I said, "Well, I got them from the Australian Institute of Criminology." I said, "It's in their report." And she goes, "Well, that figure's far too low. Because you have those other 4 categories, it lowers the amount of male offenders versus female." And, I was subsequently told off saying that we only usually refer to intimate partner violent offences. And I said, "Well, why would you do that?" I said, "They're all domestic violence offences." And that is, I guess, when it dawned on me that we're not talking about the other categories. We just focus a lot on intimate partner violence and those offences that derive from that. And I can understand that in terms of numbers. But there are whole cohorts of victims out there that we are not really focusing on. I mean, they get some mention and then, we move on very quickly. There's no sustained focus or attention on these other cohorts. And it was good to see that the AIC has released that report on parricide. I mean, it is a small number of offences, but nonetheless, these people are getting killed by their own sons and daughters. We need to look at these type of offences. And I think when we talk about domestic violence offences in terms of homicides, etc., we should always be talking about, remembering there's 4 categories. There's not just one, there's 4.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think perhaps it doesn't mean we can't be talking about, say, intimate partner violence as much as we are, but just making sure that we're not forgetting the other victims, like you said. Terry, I really appreciate your time on the briefing today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Tara.
That was Dr Terry Goldsworthy speaking with me there. And that's it for this episode of The Briefing.